Good afternoon. Welcome to the Moving Forward podcast, the latest installment here today, where we're talking about the outtakes from Ellucian Live. And we wanted to bring back our panel that we've used in some of the earlier discussions going into Ellucian Live, where we didn't have a lot of clarity and there were a lot of concerns about what we might hear. Hope Jacobson, the Vice President of our Higher Ed Services at Deerbrook, and Greg Theisen, who has worked in anthology in a variety of roles advising customers in the post-anthology era. So I wanted to start us off following up on kind of the three big takeaways and amplify it with your perspectives on that. I know, Hope, you attended the Ellucian Live with me as part of one of our customers' team. And Greg, you just know a lot about it because you've worked inside the product for a while. The first big takeaway for me was, look, anthology student is not deadheaded. Though we knew coming into the Ellucian Live conference that it wasn't going to be sold again, what we really heard is how does it fit in the strategy of Ellucian student. I think there were a lot of fears coming that it might really go away, that it would be a forced migration, and they were very clear that there wasn't. So it part of that valuation, I think, is also that there are feature sets that would come up. Greg, I know you and I had talked, and you and I and Hope had talked about the fears that it might go away, but also optimism that there might be real value there to the Ellucian ecosystem from Anthology and its products. What's your takeaway from that idea that they're not going to go away from it and that they're actually going to try and bring over capabilities into Ellucian student?
Well, before the conference, we had speculated, what would be the best possible outcome with this acquisition, and I think it's landed. I think that Ellucian did not have the ability to really technically do a deep dive before the acquisition, and now that they have their hands on the product, I think they're seeing some really positives there. It's got a very robust API in Anthology Student, which will make the integration with Ellucian Student much easier for them. So I think that was a surprise for them. I think some of the capabilities and functionality, and we can talk about that a little bit more as well, it fills a gap that neither Banner or Colleague had. And so I think this is really the best possible outcome, I think, for the customers. So if you're already in the cloud, you definitely see a path forward. And we'll talk some more about they've got an initiative to move all of the hosted customers over to a SaaS solution, and we'll touch more on the on-prem customers. But I think this is, again, for a very negative scenario, it really came out the best possible.
Yeah, I think that I think that's exactly right. It seemed like it was going to be potentially ugly, but that recognition of value is important. Hope, you sat through most of the anthology sessions, I know, and listened as folks like Rebecca Whitehead and Jim Chalix, who were on the product side, talked about their future of product. What was your takeaway in terms of where they might have seen some of that value?
Yeah, one of the things, Andy, that we heard loud and clear is that they are bringing Anthology student capabilities into Ellucian students. So that's a really great thing for existing customers and colleges who are sitting on Anthology today, is that, they're going to have the same sort of support model, how the flow works, how they do what they need to do today inside of Anthology students. So that was really great news to hear there. It was also really great news to hear that they're keeping up with financial aid and regulatory commitments and concerns. They've got an ongoing roadmap that is consistent of everything that's been in flight, and that does have some enhancements that have been pre-planned. So they're continuing to follow through on their commitments there. So those were a couple of the few things that I heard that I thought were really, really great for those colleges who are currently sitting with the Anthology students today.
And also too is if they dig into the product more, things like rolling starts, their enrollment model, face model, as they dig into that capability and what it provides, they can now make an informed decision of how does that get incorporated into Ellucian student. So there is a path here, and the functionality is not trivial functionality. It's quite useful for a lot of schools, for trade schools, for non-traditional schools. And I think they are beginning to envision and imagine how they can combine these products, where, like I said, they didn't have that opportunity before Chapter 11. But now that they have their hands on the product, and as Hope just said, some of the capabilities, FA automation and enrollment and things like that, I think you'll see on the Ellucian student roadmap in the future that beginning to solidify. It's too early yet, but I think you'll begin to see that. We're probably talking a couple of years out on some of that.
That's a really good point, Greg. We started this podcast with sort of a inference that folks knew what Ellucian student is, and I wouldn't want to speak for them in terms of their messaging around Ellucian student. But generally speaking, if you're unfamiliar, it is a series of capabilities. Think registering a student or presenting a student's enrollment to them in a web interface. That Ellucian student is that interface level where you interact, but it is not a product where you migrate in the traditional sense of going to a new SIS, migrate your systems to it. Rather, as Greg alluded, and one of the powers, I think, of Anthology is that it is this Ellucian student will reach back into other products and bring the data up and present it in a way that is in this new metaphor, and bring it forward in a way that allows you to utilize tools that they have built and will continue to refine that are built in and around agentic AI as packaged for them. So
yeah, you have a different data model with each of these three products, and the Ellucian student gives you more of a common presentation layer. And so, as you just said, Andy, as you begin to layer in AI solutions in the future, the idea is this will enable that.
That's right.
And again, I think that lends the question on Anthology student standalone. What's the roadmap for AI there versus AI capabilities in Ellucian student, which will probably give a lot of institutions the desire to move to that product, because you will probably see more advanced capabilities in Ellucian student. That's where the investment will probably be going, is a top tier AI solution. And you can't be, in this world, you can't be left behind in the AI race as an institution. And if you stay too long in Anthology student, the question is, are you going to be left behind? Because they're putting all their investment into AI and Ellucian student. You would think so.
Well, I think that's the theory for all products, right? Why build a set piece product if I can have an adaptable model to build workflows and capabilities in and around it? So that's a great leads into the second high point of that is, or an implication of that, the presentation layer, if we were to think about it that way. And I think it's richer than just a presentation layer, but what that means is you continue to use your platform, and in theory, you can continue to innovate on your platform, build process workflows, use forms, do your own configuration work to make it your own. But in the future, rather than Anthology building for you what they thought the product ought to evolve to, that innovation path becomes Ellucian student and its interface. But it doesn't remove you from using the other. You're not migrating away from it. In fact, you'll still have it. And I think it also is a recognition that if you use Ellucian student for a considerable period of time, you'll also be doing some things in Anthology student, because not all of those capabilities, not all the processes will be fully represented in that new wrapper, if you will, at the top. But that also means that they're following through on their roadmap. And I know, Greg, you were close to that. What were some of the things that you recall that were on that roadmap that they're following through on? I know before this call, or the podcast, we did talk about, as an example, reading transcripts and extracting for transfer credit information off of them.
Yeah, I mean, I had been working on a project at Ellucian where we were, when we were implementing new customers, we were using AI to read transcripts from existing transcripts as a source of truth to validate upon implementation of a new client. So leveraging that logic that becomes a feature in the product. So when you have transcript credits, working with AWS, they were very, very effectively able to read PDF transcripts and translate them. So that kind of thing, leveraging the AI, that idea was already built and rolling that out into the product. Things like use of AI on registration as well. Leveraging what you're doing in degree progress audit and then using AI to help do effective registration and scheduling. So there's a lot of capabilities there, and they had been thinking of those. Some of those things had not appeared on the roadmaps, but they were in works, and they wanted to get them a little bit more solidified before they appeared on the roadmap. So I think you're seeing that. You'll probably see a few more of those. And a lot of that was around AI, is where can we effectively use AI on the product to reduce the operational load of the staff. So I think there's more of that. I think longer term, big question I would have, and you guys may have heard a little bit of this at the conference, is if Ellucian student has kind of an AI roadmap and tiers that would include that, how does that affect potential future innovation on the anthology student, which is definitely something you want to keep an eye on. As they begin to fork the code more and more, that's a painful proposition for a SaaS company if you've got too many versions of your code. And so they're going to have to make the hard decisions on innovation. I think, again, if you go 2-3 years out, you'll see more of that innovation around AI appearing on Ellucian student. And again, you guys can probably give me some feedback from the conference, what they spoke to on that area. But I think they've got a good year, maybe year and a half, 2 years worth of innovation on anthology student that they were already investigating. So you'll continue to see some innovation, but they will be splitting their resources a little bit to then include that into the Ellucian student ecosystem. So
yeah, for sure, the future that was sketched is Ellucian student, but as we let in here, that didn't mean that they're going to stop work, which I think is also, it's a very positive issue for existing customers. Hope you I know, and I have talked a lot about some of those innovations that are coming to the fore in the 1 to 3, 3 to 6, 6 to 12 timeframes. What was your take on the level of investment and both volume and quality of what things are expected?
I think that Anthology is continuing to go after some of the more functional items, Andy, that they know were impacting to their students or to their clients. And so what I really like to see is, the impacts that they're doing, the changes they're making to waitlist, right? Allowing the flexibility, customized templates, allowing you to still interact and engage in a one-on-one way with your students regarding waitlist. And so some of the deep down functional items that they're doing, financial aid, they're continuing to make enhancements and updates in that space. Degree progress audits, these aren't just surface level type changes that they're doing. Like, they're diving into the product and making the enhancements. So for that, I was really happy to see. I think that the colleges who are on Anthology student today are going to be really happy with some of the work that's coming and being pushed out to production in the next 1 to 3, 3 to 6. In up to 9 months.
Well, one of our fears on previous podcasts was, would Ellucian honor some of the financial commitments from the contract for new features and capabilities, and the customers that were in flight and ran into difficulties, would they resolve those? And it definitely seems like they are. So, what you guys saw at the conference and what they're rolling out in the roadmap are things that they've encountered when they're implementing new clients, as well as contractual commitments. So that's a very big positive. And as we advised in previous podcasts, is you should go back at your contract and look and have that conversation with Ellucian to see the things that I have on my list in the roadmap, and when are they coming.
Yeah, and Greg, we know the devil's in the details.
Yeah.
Right? Like how the minutia of how these things might work, but I think the big message that I would like to get out to people that I heard being at the conference was, look, Anthology students still going to be there, right? You can continue to use the product. You can make the decision to stay with Anthology student and move over into Ellucian student while not having to change your business processes, not having to do a data migration, what that means for those folks who are on cloud today. It gives you that time to be more strategic with your decision. And so
that's the key, Hope. It's those that are in the cloud today.
Well, and that's right. Those who are in the cloud today. And so it just provides a little bit of time and space for people to pause for a moment, think strategically about where their next steps may be. The folks that we need to talk about are those who are not in the cloud today, right? And those are the ones that are going to have an immediate need or an impact, or they've got to make a decision.
Yeah, and that kind
Yeah,
of goes back to previous conversations is, you have time if you're in the cloud today. If you're on-prem, you need to start thinking about and evaluating right away what your path is. I'm sorry,
I
Andy,
think
you
the
were...
perspective I'd share is it's not just that you have time as if there's some cliff. They were very clear that there's no end of life for Anthology Student, and we know both that Ellucian's practice and other large enterprise class products, they sometimes continue along forever. And what they're telling us, I think, in this architecture is you can stay there and you can innovate. Future the AI future may be enabled through a different path that requires an upgrade, but I don't even think it's like you have time. You have the space to go realize the value that you've created. The ROI can continue on if you're content with it, and it provides the flexibility through work processes and forms and those native Microsoft architectures. Those are going to continue to be enabled as far as anybody can foresee. It's more than just having time. It can be your future proof for a decade. Now, whether or not you're going to be enticed economically, or maybe there's going to be a lot of fun, cool features in that Ellucian student interface that are going to, the siren's call will draw you to it. But now you can, and much to the point of if you're a banner or a colleague customer of Ellucian, those products aren't going to be independently developed, from what we can tell, any more than Anthology Student is going to be independently developed, because the future for those products is Ellucian Student as well. So instead of having 2 pathways to Ellucian Student, you're really going to have 3 now by being that. But you got to be in SaaS, which is kind of what I think Greg was alluding to. So one thing that was super clear is you must be in a SaaS version, software as a service version, of colleague or banner or Anthology Student. Most Anthology Student customers were already there. There was probably, estimate-wise, 50-ish that weren't, but most of them were either in a kind of a hosted model, SaaS 1.0, I think it was called, and the 2.0, which is full-on SaaS with API. So, Greg, I think we're aware that the people who are in the hosted cloud model are going to be moved.
They've started that process. We started it before the Chapter 11.
Yep. So those people are moving anyway. That's not a cost to the customer. At least it has not been historically to move them from one to the other. That was my understanding of the working model.
Yeah, and that's true. And then for the on-prem customers, the big shift in the heartburn they've had in the past is, they're doing direct access to the database and SQL requests. And so it's retooling some of those integrations to an API approach to get to the cloud. There is a grace period, and that's where the Cloud One environment, which is kind of a lift and shift, and then you have a year in the cloud to begin to retool your integrations. The thing that I think a lot of institutions struggle with, and I'm seeing a lot of this on AI implementations, is a lot of businesses and institutions, their operating models are stale. And what we see when you go to the cloud or you start to include AI functionality, what you think you had as an operating model is being really stress tested. So almost any path, if you're already in the cloud and you're looking at AI future with Anthology Student or Ellucian Student, you probably want to do a fine tune of your operating model. And if you're on-prem and you've got all these IT-related functions you've got to retool, but on top of that, you're changing your flow and your workflows for your staff and your administration, so you've got to look at your operating model. And so, you hear a lot about governance. Go and get your governance in place before you do AI. I would equally say, go get your operating model tuned up. And Andy, you guys at Deerbrook do this all the time. I mean, part of looking at somebody's operating model, I think it just screams more and more what we're seeing. If you want to take advantage of the innovation, if you want to keep up with everything we've just talked about, is that you start with your governance and your operating model. It makes the AI adoption, it will make the Ellucian student adoption a much clearer path. And I don't know if you agree, but I've seen that a lot right now.
I'm going to turn it over to Hope, but it is utterly true. And, the interesting thing, just because it popped in my head, this discussion that you just had is the same if you're a colleague on-prem or Banner on-prem. There's so much change moving from, like you say, having direct SQL access and doing things through stored processes versus then understanding how it is that you work with a SaaS model where you just don't have that kind of access. Hope, what do you think about that? Like, I know there's a technical lift and shift that has to happen, right? We can talk more about that for the on-prem people. But talk about that change in process from your perspective. Like, what are the things that people got to think about now?
Oh, yeah. It's interesting because I had many conversations at eLive about this across platforms. It didn't matter if you were colleague, Banner, or Anthology. It's people are genuinely concerned about the amount of customizations that they have with an on-prem product and, the business processes that need to change. And it's coming back to and saying, okay, we're going to have to do work differently. Right. And so, within the business itself, it's a pretty big lift to get ready mentally to prepare to say, hey, even though I'm staying with the same product, I now have to go and change my business processes, right? Or we have to remove this customization. How do we standardize the work that we're doing? Or how are we changing the work? That change management piece that is coming along with, and the influencing our business partners within a college that they have to do work differently and they have to think about work differently is a very big, long time intensive thing. And so to move from being, having control over your instance of a software where you can do anything you want to it, not just technically, but from a business process as well, coming into a platform that is managed the way that SaaS is managed is a very different thing. And it's not a small underhaul, and it's a transformational project, right? That has all the bits and parts with it. And so the more colleges, the more folks can start thinking about this and what it means for them. I'm happy to help talk through any of those things with anybody if you have any questions, but there's a lot to it to get it going. So it's business process, it's, customizations, it's how you operate, right? It's the mindset, it's a people project, it's all the things.
Well, that change management is where you begin to realize your return on investment. We like to point at the technology and the system and say that's your return on investment. But if you don't change your business processes, one of the institutions I previously worked at, we had a large call center, and when we implemented the solution and the change management, we realized 900 hours a day in savings across the administration. And so again, with AI is really shining a light on this. And moving to SaaS is a good start. So again, if you're on-prem and you're going to SaaS, you don't have the same level of cybersecurity staff you need once you're in the cloud, because Ellucian is now handling a big portion of that. So again, if you're looking to do a ROI for your leadership, it's that change management, it's the governance, it's the migration to the cloud that all begin to define your value proposition. And then again, you're all getting pressure right now on the AI piece. So this is the precursor to trying to justify all the AI components.
Well, and it's part of the journey. I apologize, Andy. It's part of the journey, right? So if you can remove that customization and you can leverage the SaaS product as it's designed, right, without saying, oh, I've got this little thing that I have to do over here, right? The advantage to leveraging it and not customizing is that you can take full advantage of AI. You know what I mean? And you can do so much more with it. And so there is an ROI, but you got to think bigger than, what's right here, right? And start thinking longer term, because these tools that are being implemented with Ellucian, you'll be able to pick up and run with and use and reap the benefits of, plug and play workflows, right?
Yeah. So processing financial aid in 12 days, you process financial aid in an hour, and you're building automations with AI. That's what's coming with these platforms, and your incentive to go to the cloud and get to Ellucian student.
or any other product, really. I think one of the interesting things about that is, I don't hope can check me. I did not hear that if you're on-prem, there's a date certain by which you must get off. It was clear that if you want the benefits of a Ellucian student, you're going to have to come off. But there was no end of life. So, but as Greg, you've pointed out, the economics of a SaaS company, and this is true of Ellucian and its legacy on-prem instances as well, it's awful hard to sustain patches, updates, configuration changes, fixing things that because of customizations that are done that break. There's a lot of incentive to manage, one platform, which is economically why SaaS can be why people want to do SaaS if you're a product company. So we don't really know if there is, but it is definitely a place where the level of investment, and I'm quite sure Ellucian said that their level of investment on-prem is ending or near to end, and that would be true, I'm sure, of Ellucian or Anthology student as well. What if you're facing down that time to move, and there was a interesting panel with a customer who was on-prem and dissatisfied with the product and decided to move. They talked about at the point of the bankruptcy announcement, they elected to go to Banner in the cloud. So their path was not only to shift from an on-prem model, but then to go up to a different platform. That does require all the migrations. What are the big technical hurdles if you're going to come from, say, on-prem, campus management product, Campus Nexus, up to Anthology student? What are the big technical things that you got to get out of the way that you're going to require some help with, or are going to take a lot of effort for you?
Well, I mean, the big one always is the two big ones would be all the integrations that you've built, which are really a customization, and the other one is all of the reporting. Again, at one institution I was at, my first week, I looked at did an inventory of this was a Banner school, of all of the custom reports. There were 600 of them. And I said, okay, let's see when was the last time any of them were used. So those are rare, because your administration, everybody's got the report that's near and dear to their heart, and they don't want to let it go. And so if you're going from on-prem where you're doing direct access to the databases and you've got to go and rewrite those reports, and that's where the partnerships, the CNET migration, what we did is we basically converted the Crystal reports to SSRS reports for the customers. For the on-prem, again, you work with partners like Higher Ed BPO or Deerbrook, who have the expertise to very quickly convert these. They know the product. But once you kind of get past and understand what does it take to move our integrations and our reporting, the data mapping, it's been done a lot, so people kind of understand. If you're going from on-prem to the cloud, there's no data mapping if you stay within the same platform. It's when you convert platforms, and as we talked about earlier, if you're a rolling enrollment, you're not going to Banner. If you're a traditional school on in campus management on-prem going to Banner, it's a little more straightforward, and you just have to do the mapping. But trust me, everybody discovers how dirty their data is when they do a migration, right? And you start to write those reports. Why is that report wrong? Well, your data was always wrong. You didn't know that for the last 5 years. So I think it goes back to doing an inventory of what you have. When we've done migrations in the past, I say, give me an inventory of all your reports and all your integrations. Let's understand that. Let's figure out what really needs to be done, and that's going to dictate a lot of the cost. Again, it's that upfront, understand your processes, understand your governance, do an inventory of your infrastructure, and then it becomes kind of a formula. We actually had a formula at Anthology where we'd plug all that in and it would spit out the cost.
That did the work. So hope, thinking about those folks that are on-prem, because they really do have a clock on them about where they go and what they do. What, of all the things, and you mentioned a few of them earlier, but of all the things, if they were going to take that on right now and start planning on a move, and presumably, they could look at any product, but if you were going to want to stay close to the Ellucian student ecosystem, it's probably to Anthology student, not changing to a different data construct and different interfaces altogether. What would be the first thing that you would want to talk about process-wise or organization-wise in getting ready for that shift?
Yeah, I'd want to look at, as Greg mentioned, their reports and their business processes. What customizations do they have? Like those would be the two first things that I would look at, and I would add very quickly to that list integrations. So those would be the three areas that I would take a solid look at.
Yeah, and looking at them though from how they do their work, right? Not just inventory of them, but I think that's always the challenge, right? I use this stored procedure and the way I work, and I'm not going to have that stored procedure, right? So what would a workflow in, say, Anthology student using a workflow creator look like to mitigate that, or the native capabilities? I think that's where having partners help see those pitfalls and know, because the worst is like, well, it doesn't do what I used to do, and I'm surprised. You shouldn't be surprised if you get that in place first. Nobody likes to be surprised unless it's pleasantly.
And for those listening to the podcast, a lot of the resources that used to do this in professional services have left Anthology and Ellucian, and some of them have come to Deerbrook and higher ed BPO. So some of the experts that have done this for years are available.
No, that's a really great point. I think finding a partner is going to be more important than it might have been in the past, because the focus of Ellucian is Ellucian student, and implementing older software or these older platforms. And that's true probably of Banner and Colleague as well. Those folks were thinner, I think, at Ellucian, but a lot of them were at Anthology. That was your go-to resource. So I think needing to find those people is going to become more important. So I hope we'll go in reverse order. Any last thoughts? Anything that we didn't cover here about Ellucian Live that folks really ought to know as we wrap up this Moving Forward podcast?
No, not really, Andy, but I'll put an ask out there to the listeners. Like, if you guys have something, if you heard something, like, I'd love to hear where your head's at, what you heard, what you thought, where you guys are going, or, just generate some conversation around it. The more people you talk to, knowledge is power in that sense. So, I encourage anybody who wants to have a conversation, like, let's chat, because I'm genuinely curious how you felt about the conference and how they're responding to it and the things that they're doing at their colleges. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Excellent. Greg, any parting thoughts now that we know Anthology students still going to be alive and kicking for a while?
Yeah, I think you kind of made the point earlier that yes, you can breathe a kind of a sigh of relief for the moment. I don't think I would sit back and wait too long. I think you just need to move forward and come up with a plan. Ellucian is trying really hard. They're a business, right? So they have to figure out how to be a profitable business. We all want them to be a profitable business because we don't want to go through this again, right? So as they learn the product and their roadmap and trying to consolidate their costs, yes, again, I've reached out to my network and people said, I sigh of relief after the conference. I don't have to do anything right now. I said, well, yes and no. I think you need to be figuring out with any enterprise solution suite, you need to stay on top of it and figure out what's happening. So sigh of relief, but don't take more than a week off before you try to figure out what you're doing. And obviously Deerbrook and higher ed BPO can help you navigate that.
I think that's exactly right. I think there's a good opportunity to inform a strategy, and that's a good use of time. That's a good use. Always good. Better to have a path forward than be a cork floating on the ocean. That's a very uncomfortable place to be, having been in the Navy. So I appreciate both your time today. I hope this Moving Forward podcast is interesting. We'll please keep an eye out. I expect we'll be doing some webinars here soon to talk more detail about if you're on-prem. We've not talked a lot here about the finance platform on D365, Dynamics 365 F&O. I'm going to talk more in detail about the way forward on that and some of the impacts of staffing and how it fits into the Ellucian Live ecosystem. And then also I think about managed services with the professional services team of the former anthology getting a lot skinnier now. How is it you're going to get help that you need if you want to continue to get ROI and preserve your flexibility and your ability to innovate on the current anthology student while you consider a Ellucian student and its timing for you? So more of those coming on moving forward. Greg, Hope, thanks again for being here. And for all our listeners, thanks for taking time out to chew the fat with us, albeit virtually. Hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.